G'day, Michael Tessaro, and I prepared this ACCC cheat sheet for March 2025. If you haven't seen one before, what it is basically summarising all the ACCC press releases for the month of March 2025. So you can just listen to this and know everything that happened in that particular month. You don't have to read all those press releases. A bit of background about myself. I'm a competition and consumer lawyer, and I've been running my practice as a legal consulting for coming up on 18 years now, and I help companies, individuals with competition and consumer law issues. I do some expert consultancy work as well for various legal publishers, and I have a part-time role on NCAT in the commercial consumer division, so I get my hands dirty doing genuine consumer cases in that jurisdiction. Prior to that, I worked at ACCC 15 years in a variety of roles, including enforcement and mergers and asset sales. I've outlined courts, enforcement, mergers. I guess the big thing in March was some guidance on the new merger law, so that's in the guidelines section, inquiries and consultations, authorisations, and other. Now, there were no court matters in March that came down, so that's unusual. Usually there's at least one, but there was a High Court case coming down in April, which I'll discuss, obviously, the Hutchinson High Court case. In terms of enforcement, there was two unusual enforcement actions, not the general things you see with the ACCC. The first was an allegation that TPG Telecom had breached its joint functional separation undertaking, which it entered into under the Telecommunications Act. So this is a particular undertaking which the major telcos have to provide under the Act to the ACCC to say they're going to keep their wholesale and retail operations separate. And the reason for that is that the wholesale business supplies services to downstream competitors as well as to TPG's downstream operations. So the risk is that if the wholesale operations can discover stuff, the retail operations discover stuff about the other side of the business, they might have confidential information which will assist them in the market. So it's required to keep things totally separate. So what happened here was somehow the ACCC found out that TPG had not maintained the separation and had thus breached its undertaking. So you can see there, August 23 to May 24, TPG failed to have measures in place to prevent staff of its wholesale and retail businesses from accessing the other's premises. So they're going to other premises, and the idea being that if they're on the premises, they might be able to access some confidential information. As you can see, the concern was a senior TPG wholesale staff member on 4 occasions went unaccompanied to TPG's retail offices, and they were there without any physical other security barriers. So the concern was maybe they could jump onto a laptop or a computer and download all this confidential information about the retail side of the business. That would have been some advantage to the wholesale operations. And I guess, as you see there, the last paragraph, staff separation obligation tend to prevent staff from the two businesses sharing sensitive information. So there's no suggestion they did actually share sensitive information. They're just allowing this access to people from the wholesale business to the retail part of the business, and that's not on. And so there was no penalty, significant penalty, 75,120. But it's the first time I've heard of somebody getting in trouble for breaching a functional separation undertaking. So I think if it continues to happen, I think maybe the penalties will go up a bit. But yeah, that was an interesting one. Another interesting one was this Cadell Constructions, where the company was caught out for breaching the water charge rules. And again, this hasn't happened very often in the past. So Cadell Construction issued a notice to its customers proposing to more than double its fixed charges for its infrastructure, its water infrastructure. But then the problem, it sort of backdate the increase for a few months, and then basically sent invoices out to all these customers saying, okay, you now owe us more for the water you bought because we retrospectively increased the prices. And as you can see on the water charge rules, operators must properly notify their customers of changes to charging arrangements. So I don't think that's really proper the way they did that. And you can't adopt a new schedule of charges that purports to come into effect retrospectively. So effectively, trying to charge customers more for water they've already bought is not on. So effectively, what happened, the ACCC here got an A7B undertaking. Cadell admitted the breach. They weren't punished financially. And this is an interesting one because I'm assuming one of the customers blew the whistle on Cadell, and ACCC's come down on them. Not super hard, but I guess it's a warning to all the providers in this area to be careful because ACCC will probably escalate the sanctions if it continues to occur. In the mergers area, DP World wanted to buy Silk, and obviously DP World is a stevedore and a container terminal operator, but also involved in container transport. So there's horizontal and vertical issues here. Silk's a transport provider, so the concern was there'd be an increase in concentration and horizontally at that transport provider level. But probably of more concern was the vertical integration issues that maybe DP World would have an incentive to try and preference Silk in various ways. So as you can see, the first two concerns were about horizontal issues, likely reduced competition in supply of container transport services because they're both doing that work, lead to high prices and reduced quality for importers and exporters in terms of container transport services, so again horizontal. But then you've got your vertical concerns. The merger may create the ability incentive for DP World to increase terminal fees, maybe to competitors of Silk, make their costs higher or worsen the quality of terminal services. So it might mean, give Silk all the early morning slots when there's not a lot of traffic on the road, and give the competitors the afternoon slots where there's a lot of traffic on the roads and it takes a long time to get anywhere in Sydney. So they're the kinds of things that they're concerned about. Also, whether DP World might have an incentive to offer below cost transportation prices to particular importers and exporters, as long as they use, DP World businesses. So that's the idea of providing a financial incentive to move the business over to DP World's controlled businesses, including Silk. So they're the concerns that are raised. They're classic horizontal and vertical concerns, particularly with at the ports, which are highly concentrated, huge barriers to entry. I think I could probably safely say that this does get through in April, but I won't spoil your enjoyment. I'll deal with it in the next presentation how it's resolved. Focus on TPG businesses. This was an interesting one. ACCC found there wasn't an issue in this particular case. Vocus was proposing to acquire TPG Telecom's fixed line business, enterprise, government and wholesale customer base, as well as its fibre and transmission networks. And what the ACCC found was even though they're both in the same market, they're not close competitors effectively. Vocus tends to focus on large enterprise and government customers, whereas TPG is more at the small and medium enterprise segment. So they're in the same market, but they're not really going head to head in trying to win the same customers. The other factor that's very relevant here is that even after Vocus buys TPG's assets, there's still a bunch of other people in the market that can provide a strong constraint. So you've got Telstra, Optus, Aussie Broadband, Superloop, etc. So there was no lessening competition here, and this was waved through. Now, here are the merger guidelines. The first is some transitional arrangements. So clearly, we've got the new laws coming in for the merger review process in 1st January 26, and people are wondering, what are we going to do from now until then? And it's a sort of strange arrangement. As I understand it, people can elect from now to the end of the year to use the new system or stick with the existing system. And that means you can stick with the informal system or you can go to the new mandatory system. I don't know why you'd go to the new mandatory system. I can't really see there'd be much benefit in doing that. There might be some reason. So they just want to clarify that. They're trying to help businesses understand how it's all going to work going forward in the transitional phase. And that's good. There is a bit of confusion over this. I think the confusion might arise from saying to companies that they can elect to use the new system or the old system. Maybe if they had said that, there wouldn't be so much confusion. I don't know. But anyway, so this is a helpful guide to, I guess, businesses on how to manage the transition. Then they put out some draft merger assessment guidelines. So again, they're trying to assist business to understand how the ACCC is going to approach the new laws. The thing that I find somewhat funny here is that most of the changes to the new laws are largely procedural. The current system is informal, it's not suspensory, there's no specific, information requirements you have to provide the ACCC. In the future, it's going to be mandatory, suspensory. There are going to be minimum information requirements. So a lot of it isn't really, analytical changes. It's more procedural changes. The two areas where there is a bit of, I guess, need for analytical guidance is in relation to entrenching market power change, which arguably is already there in the Act, but I guess probably worthwhile for the ACCC to provide a bit of guidance on how they interpret that, um, that obligation of not to entrench market power. And the second one is the ability of the ACCC now under the new regime to put together a bunch of smaller acquisitions and to consider the combined effect of them. So it can look at a bunch of acquisitions that occurred over a time frame, and then instead of looking at each individually, put them all together and say, okay, these 5 acquisitions have had this collective effect on this particular market, and we think that's a substantial lesson in competition. That probably requires a bit of analytical guidance, but apart from that, I think most of the changes aren't requiring an analytical, great analytical exposition. Really, it's the good old merger guidelines are still going to do the trick in terms of explaining how the ACCC approaches, defining markets and assessing competition. But I guess you put these new laws come in. It's good to put guidelines out to just express how the regulator is going to go applying the law. And I guess the thing here as well, some issues might come up through the consultation process that the ACCC hasn't thought about, and that can be helpful to provide some guidance. They also talk about increased transparency. I guess the system will provide more transparency. There can be a register of various mergers and stuff like that. Although I've got to say, I think our system is very transparent already. I think we provide a lot of transparency. So I don't think it's a huge leap for the ACCC. And predictability, I don't know. I think the Australian system is fairly predictable. I think compared to some of the other jurisdictions, it's very predictable compared to some of the mergers that you see getting taken down in Europe and the US. But I guess if you can achieve greater predictability, that's obviously a good thing. Now, this is a little bit confusing because there was 2 reports issued by the ACCC in March that seem to say the same thing. I don't quite know why. There's one on the 2nd and one later in the month, and they're both looking at the NBN's service quality and network performance. So I'm not too sure why there was 2, but anyway, I won't go through them in a huge amount of detail, the second one. So effectively, NBN has promised to do things to a particular standard, and they report to the ACCC. Obviously, there's not all the costing stuff they can't. The ACCC gets that information, but they can't disclose that with commercial in confidence. But it can report on things like how they're going in connections and fixing up faults. So here you've got, the findings. Most service orders were completed and service faults restored within 1 business day. That's very fast. Connect very high percentage of services within the time frames allowed, so that's good. Reported outages were not, hey, what happened? They were more like planned maintenance and upgrade work, so that's also good. And then obviously continuing problems with the ancient copper line network. So there's going to be problems there until it's phased out entirely. Then this is a different report. This is a measuring broadband report. This is measuring how the broadband is performing, and it's all, I guess, good news. The fixed wireless plus plan during the busy periods is actually improving from 86 megabytes per second to 93.3. So that's very impressive. Upload speeds are also increasing. Importantly, the services in regional remote areas are improving. They're getting greater access to faster broadband, so that's great. Fibre to no connections continue to underperform. Not much of a surprise there. The last one's, I think, interesting because I seem to recall in an earlier report that Starlink was miles ahead of NBN in terms of satellite services. Like it was really daylight between the two of them. And this current report shows NBN and Starlink quite close together in their performance. So that's really good. Starlink's obviously Mr. Musk's business, and it looks like NBN's providing him with a bit more competition, which is good. Airports, this is very depressing reading, I think. Airport monitoring report, huge profits being made by the airports. They don't really compete against each other. And as you can see, in relation to aeronautical charges, the revenues reported were the highest ever. 24.3% increase in revenues, $2.6 billion by the major four airports. And I guess largely driven by increase in international passenger numbers, so more big planes, higher charges, rose by 32.1%, the number of passengers. So that's obviously going to increase the revenues. But look at the revenues. Sydney Airport recorded aeronautical operating profit of 570.5 million. There's just no competition. There's no pressure on these guys to keep their profits at reasonable levels. Represented a 20.2% return on its assets. That's a great return on your assets. And then you got the car parking, and I think you say it's not rocket science. People parking the cars themselves. Operating profits and car parking grew in all four airports. And look at the profits. Brisbane increased 21.1%, and they're all making huge operating profits. And then at the end there, you see all four monitored airports reported operating profit margins above 60%. And you're doing all the work. You're actually parking your own car. It's not like they're doing anything. It's not like they're parking the car for you. So this is, Albanese talked about price gouging laws. This is where price gouging laws should be focused on aeronautical charges and airport parking. These are ridiculous margins. They're obviously, each of them are little monopolies. They face virtually no competition, and they're definitely gouging consumers. Here's, if you want to really get the press, read all this. It shows all the figures from the airport report. Supermarket report came out. Now, I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail because I haven't read the whole report, 400 pages, and B, it probably deserves its own little presentation to go through things in a bit of detail. So I won't go through an incredible amount of detail, but it was a lot of expectation about this report. I think the big thing was whether the ACCC would find price gouging was happening, and also whether they'd recommend divestiture. Probably the big newsworthy finding that they made was that Australian supermarkets are some of the most profitable supermarket businesses among global peers. So that wasn't really a surprise, because I know that you're able to sort of compare Aldi's margins, say in Europe and UK with Australia, and they're making heaps more money here than they're making overseas. And Costco, once you strip out all their membership fees, because they make a lot of money from their membership fees, once you strip all that out and consider their grocery margins in the States compared to here, they're much higher. So it wasn't any surprise that we have a very profitable supermarket sector. Both Aldi and Costco make more money here than they do overseas. And Coles and Woolies, despite all what they say, they don't compete that hard against each other. And why would they? It's not economically rational to be cutting each other's throats if you don't need to. So this was a bad finding for the supermarkets, that they're very profitable globally. The other thing that wasn't good for them was that the ACCC found average product margins have increased over the past 5 financial years. So that suggests in a cost of living crisis, these guys are making bigger margins. And that's the sort of suggesting some price gouging. However, as you can see in the next paragraph there, the ACCC didn't find any evidence of price gouging, which I think the government would have been pretty disappointed with that finding. But not surprising. I don't think they're price gouging. They might be misrepresenting savings. They're not competing. But price gouging is really charging a very high margin relative to your cost of goods. And in overseas jurisdictions where they have this law, the people who have been caught out regularly have been pharmaceutical companies who have a very low cost of production and are jacking up the price of life-saving drugs by 1,000%. And they're the guys that have been caught out for price gouging. There's no evidence of any supermarkets being caught out overseas. The major targets here would probably be pharmaceutical companies, airports. They'd be the two that would be on my list. Anyway, and the other thing that was recommended was divestiture remedy. There's no surprises there. I think the ACCC probably initially thought that would be a good thing to recommend, but then Albanese came out, I think he's having a bad day, and he just said, we're not doing divestiture remedy. We're not a Soviet state. I don't know, something along those lines. Pretty crazy stuff. Because I don't know if Russia has a divestiture remedy, but I know a lot of companies that aren't Soviet states like the US and Europe, a lot of European nations have a divestiture remedy for breaches of dominance, breaches of market power. So it's really not something that you see in the former Soviet Union. It's something you do see in advanced Western economies. And it does make sense. If a company has market power and starts using that market power to breach the law, then you can fine them or you can take away their market power. And the only way you can take away the market power is by forcing them sell the assets that give them market power. And it just makes perfect sense, economic sense. And it is the basis on which the merger law works. So you look at a merger, somebody wants to buy this competitor. You're concerned that if they get all the assets in a particular location, they're going to have market power. They're going to use that to hurt the competitors, put up prices. So you force them to sell those assets. You take away their substantial from the substantial listed competition, and the market, can continue functioning in a competitive way. So it is disappointing that Albanese said that, because I think the second he said that, the chance of this remedy being introduced here was virtually zero, and the chances of the ACCC recommending it were zero as well. Now, as I said, I haven't read the whole report, so I won't go through this in a huge amount of detail, but ACCC made 20 recommendations. The first one was supporting community-owned stores. Not too sure about this one. It sounds the government getting in a grocery business. I don't know if that sounds like a good idea. A lot of recommendations about increasing the amount of information that consumers get and making sure the information they get is clear and accurate. And that's all good stuff. Looking at planning and zoning issues, looking at the unit pricing code, which is definitely a very valuable thing to give consumers the ability to compare prices. Shrinkflation, trying to deal with that issue, providing much more detail about the way loyalty programs work. Are they having an anti-competitive effect? I don't know if the take-up on loyalty programs has been huge. I don't know if it's a big success. So many people have tried loyalty programs and dumped them because they just weren't working. So I'm not too sure they've got a long-term viability in Australia. Complaints mechanisms in remote locations. The grocery code is going to be really key here, the food and grocery code. I think there's going to have to be some tweaks made to the code to implement some of these recommendations that ACCC's made. Obviously, a big focus on providing farmers with more information, more notice, making sure that things don't change at the last moment, that produce isn't rejected or prices change. The thing I don't know is how widespread this conduct is. There have been some stories, some anecdotes about what sounds like pretty bad behaviour, but I'm not too sure it's that widespread. Then you've got other things about, transparencies, making certain if their orders are being placed, providing farmers with certainty. Interesting one there, suppliers should be allowed to apply their own branding to fresh produce. And that's, I guess, some advertising that they want to do. The problem is there that, maybe Coles and Woolies want to put their branding on it. Transparency about rebates, which I think is somewhat problematic because it's quite confidential information. So I don't know transparency, how that's going to work. And obviously, supplier funding contributions to the in-house retail media services. So obviously, sometimes, very regularly, Coles and Woolies might say, okay, give us some money to promote your product in the store, and they want greater transparency about that. Again, I don't know how some of these transparencies going to work out. It is very commercially sensitive information. Okay, so there's a gas report, and this was not the regular report. It was a short-term update about gas availability, and I think they ACCC put it out. It suddenly realised that there's going to be a shortfall now, and this has been frustrating. It's sort of like, there's going to be enough gas, there's going to be shortfall, there's going to be enough gas, and there's going to be a shortfall. So it's very frustrating. I don't know, these LNG producers are going to cut their own throats if they keep this up. But ACCC was concerned there'd be a national shortfall of 9 petajoules in the period July to September 2025, so not far away. if LNG producers continue to go the way they're going with exporting uncontracted gas. The big concern is the southern states. All the gas is sort of pretty north and it's got to be shipped down south. So the risk here, there could be a 40 petajoule shortage in the southern states if you know, the gas has to come down from the north. So the domestic production in the south will be 40 petajoules short of what's required. Um, Now, after the ACCC issued the report, the Albanese government intervened and got undertakings from the gas producers to say, you must supply the 9 petajoules of gas to the domestic market. So I guess the Albanese government's heavied them into making sure the domestic market is supplied. And there must have been a threat there, I imagine. They're saying do it or else. I don't know quite um, what the threat was, but I'm assuming they're saying, well, you make an undertaking to keep this gas in the domestic market, or we're going to force you to uh, have a cap, and you can't send it overseas. So it's still very bad. The competition in the market isn't great. The prices overseas are high, and LNG producers want to obviously capitalise. And this is the other 31st of March, another report which more or less said the same thing as the earlier report. So a bit confusing. It's got all the issues there. Something at the bottom there, like the first few are the same as the earlier report earlier in the month, but it said there was a 15% increase in total network faults and a 3% increase in dropouts. Now, I think it's pretty low, and so 15% isn't a huge number, but it is going the wrong way, and I guess that's a concern for the NBN. They've got to be working out why there's so many network faults. It might be just various weather conditions. Um, so that's two reports in the same month covering the same issues. I'm not quite sure why ACCC. Authorizations, first one was sustainable finance. So this is allowing, I guess, companies to get together to talk about ways of promoting sustainable investments. And I guess you've got a bunch of guys in the room who are competitors, and they shouldn't be in the room talking unless there's a public benefit that justifies it. And here is if they work together, they can promote sustainable investments, sustainable projects, and that's good for the general community. So they've got an interim authorisation. They can start talking, and it's got to come back. ACCC gets a feedback, and ultimately the ACCC might say, yeah, you can keep doing it, or they might conclude that the public benefits aren't great enough and say, no, stop talking. There was also this authorisation allowing a bunch of sugar trading companies to get together to collectively bargain with the Sugar Terminals Limited. And this is based on the principle that Sugar Terminals Limited has a lot of power in the market, and maybe the other guys don't have much power. So to try and equalise that, might be a bad pun, equal anyway. To equalise that sort of position in the market, let all the trading companies get together and bargain as a collective group. The big thing here is that Sugar Terminals doesn't have to agree. They can say no, we don't want to negotiate with you as a group. Get lost. It may be in their interest to collectively bargain because this is one set of negotiations as opposed to 6 or 7. There's obviously transaction cost savings for Sugar Terminals if they have one negotiation. But that's obviously a good thing. It's a good idea to allow some collective bargaining where somebody clearly has market power in a segment of the market. Then the airlines, I didn't quite understand this first one. Board of Airline Representatives of Australia to continue to collectively bargain, so it's collective bargaining authorisation, and this is in terms of acquiring essential aviation services from particular operators. So effectively, a group of people is allowed to collectively bargain for the purchase of certain services from the international airports and the providers of essential aviation services. So this has been granted, and they're allowed to get together and have these discussions. Again, there's no requirements for the international airports or the providers of essential aviation service to sit down with these groups and actually collectively bargain. There are some benefits to it in terms of transaction cost savings. So I must admit, this one came out of the blue. I've never seen this one before, so I don't quite follow it. Last month, there was talk about Virgin and Qatar getting together. ACCC has decided to sign off on it. So Virgin and Qatar will be able to engage in cooperative conduct under this integrated alliance, 5 years, and it's going to double the frequency of flights between Doha and major Australian airports, so that's good. And an additional 28 new weekly return services between Doha and major airports. So that's good. I guess it doesn't improve our domestic competition problem, but it's good to have Qatar providing services internationally. The Bank Code of Conduct, so ACCC decided to issue a draft determination proposing to grant the authorisation. And the Banking Code of Conduct has a number of things that it wants to get authorisation for. And you can see here the proposed conditions. Member banks do not charge interest on informal overdrafts, alternative to refund any interest charged on informal overdrafts on basic low or no fee accounts. So it's trying to sort of say, well, we want to collectively give some financial breaks to particular consumers, and we all want to do it. We don't want to get in trouble for alleged collusion, but it's going to help out some of these individuals on basic low or no fee accounts. At least once annually to take reasonable steps to identify and directly contact existing customers who may be eligible for these particular accounts. So we can all get together and say, let's identify people who are eligible for these accounts. They might know these accounts are available, and we can tell them about it. So that's obviously a benefit for these consumers. And then they've got to report to the ACCC on the informal overdrafts that occur in certain circumstances without customers' agreement, any change in the number of member banks offering basic accounts, steps taken by member banks to identify customers eligible for basic or low fee or no fee accounts, and the uptake of this account. So there's a big reporting obligation to the ACCC on how this all pans out. So that's really it. The mergers is a big area. Like, everybody's getting geared up for the new merger laws. I think it's a big change, like having a mandatory scheme, big information requirements, going to be quite spelled out. ACCC is already very, very fast in terms of doing its decisions. 95% are let through without any problems whatsoever. Probably another 3% are let through with some divestitures. Very few are just opposed outright. So I think that's the basic thing to realise. I think there's a lot of analytical shake-up in the merger laws. I think it's largely procedural. But yeah, the ACCC is doing the right thing, getting guidance out there and just helping people along. Supermarket inquiries, I said I'll probably do more about that report. But Albanese said, despite there being no evidence of price gouging, he's going to introduce price gouging laws. Looks like he's going to win the election, so that's probably going to happen. I don't understand that really. I think it's, barking up the wrong tree there. He's got to know that supermarkets probably aren't engaging in price gouging as commonly understood. They might be not competing very hard. They might be over exaggerating or over egging their discounts, but price gouging, I don't think so. Airports, that's a price where there should be a price gouging focus. It's really, really problematic, and I don't know how the government is going to address the massive margins that these companies are earning. It's not good for tourism. It's just, airports are raking lots of dough, and you think it's got to have a negative impact on tourism. Gas is a problem. It's going up and down like a yo-yo. And again, I don't know what the solution here is. Again, there's too much market power amongst LNG producers, not much competition. There's a lot of interrelationship between gas companies. It's not good. It's just a classic market failure market. The other thing I just mentioned is probably the other is ACCC effectiveness survey. So I was contacted by a research company who wanted to ask me how the ACCC is going, and I'm not the only person. Obviously, I asked lots of people this. I had a nice, I don't know, probably about an hour discussion. I think I went too long actually, but I guess this is good. They want people to talk to this market research firm and tell them what the ACCC is doing good and what they're not doing so good on. And generally, I think they're doing very well across the board. I think they're a little bit strapped for cash. I think they're struggling to maintain their enforcement profile. I think they're not doing as many cases they need to be doing, particularly in the competition space, and that needs to be picked up. I saw Liza Carver's left, and so they've got to get a new enforcement commissioner in, and I really got to look at the number of enforcement actions they're taking. The only real feedback I gave to the person that was negative was, why does the ACCC continue cases against companies in liquidation? I don't understand that. The Mosaic Brands one was the most recent one, where they sued Mosaic Brands for various misrepresentations, and the company went into liquidation. And then they said, went to the court to argue that it's important to keep the case going. And I don't quite understand that, because I guarantee you, if they get a $50 million penalty out of that case that will never be paid, I guarantee it's going to have absolutely zero impact in terms of general deterrence. Nobody's going to really worry about that, because it's a $50 million penalty that's been issued against a company that doesn't exist. And so I think they're wasting money. And where an organisation doesn't have enough money to do things, the last thing you want to be doing is pursuing company in liquidation, where you're going to get a Phoenix fine, which you're never going to recover, and is not going to achieve any general deterrence. So that was the big feedback I gave to them. Tell the ACCC, if a company goes broke, just drop the case. Unless you sue some individuals. If you've got a couple of individual respondents, okay, keep going. But if you've got no individual respondents, just drop it and move on to a living target as opposed to a dead target. Anyway, that's all I had. Hopefully that's been helpful. Probably a bit opinionated there at the end, but it's just been an issue that I've been concerned about a while. Why pursue a company in liquidation? If you have any questions about anything I've spoken about, feel free to give me a call or drop me an email. Bye-bye.